It is after 9 o'clock now, so we are a minute late. Want to start off by just recognizing that we do have a number of members online today via WebEx. Representative Schmoy, Williams, Sawyer, Thompson, and Neely are currently on WebEx. They claim it's due to the weather. I'm pretty sure it's due to partying like Jason Kelsey last night. And on that front, I do want to give a special shout out to Bill's Mafia for all their hard work and shoveling snow this weekend and cleaning out that stadium. The House Financial Institutions and Pensions Committee does appreciate their effort and hopes they have a great off season. And also want to recognize our special guest today, Astra Shu. Where's Astra? There she is right there. Astra's school got canceled, and there's no better topic to come and listen to than Alan and Caper's presentation. So, yeah, lucky Astra today. All right, committee, we're going to go ahead and ask for bill introductions. Are there any bill introductions from the committee? Representative Lewis. Oh, you can do it. Representative, you can do it from right there.
Thank you, Chairman. I have RS 2520. It concerns unclaimed funds, and essentially it's a cleanup bill that makes it clear, if it wasn't already, that the Secretary of Treasury has the authority to move these funds between Capers and the board that otherwise takes care of the general funds. And this was a bill that is being requested by the Secretary of the Treasury.
Okay, Treasurer Johnson. Committee, are there any questions? Is there any objection? Seeing none, that bill is introduced. Are there any other bill introductions from the committee? Seeing none, do we have any bill introductions from the public? Seeing none, we will move on. All right, committee, today we're going to dive into the Caper side of our committee, the pension side, and we have Alan Conroy, Executive Director of Capers, here to give us an overview of Capers, and then we're going to go into a bill hearing on HB 2103. Committee, we heard this bill last year. It has to do with the statutory 15% alternative investment limit that we currently have. I just wanted to give a refresher because it is my intention to work this bill Wednesday. So the only person we have to testify as a proponent is Alan. We have no neutral and no opponents. So we'll have Alan do his presentation and then go into that bill hearing. So Alan, welcome to committee, sir. I appreciate the red tie today.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Glad to be here. And yes, it is a good color for today. Absolutely. The chair had asked that I spend a few minutes just, I guess, kind of walking through kind of some background information on Capers. I know it's been a while for those of you that don't have the opportunity to live it every day. And so I'm just going to share a little bit about Capers, the funding status, membership, and then talk a little bit about Capers 3. The chair had also mentioned that specifically. So just on slide 2, you'll see, of course, just remind you, the 3 systems: regular Capers, which is state, school, local, police and fire, and the retirement system from judges. We work with over 1,500 employers of state of Kansas, all the school districts, all the counties, almost all the cities. City of Wichita is probably the one exception, large enough to have their own retirement system. And then you get into all those special purpose districts like libraries and public hospitals and community colleges and so forth. On slide 3 then is, of course, we're governed by a 9-member board of trustees. I'll just point out to you, since the last session, you'll see there kind of in the middle of the page, Derek Kreifels from Shawnee, who's the chief executive officer of the State Financial Officers Foundation. He's a new trustee, and he was appointed by the Speaker of the House. And just point out that Trustee Stratton and Trustee Hill both are gubernatorial appointees. And the governor reappointed them to a second term, although the full Senate, of course, has to confirm that nomination, and it is on the list for full Senate consideration at some point. And of course, Trustee Ernie Claudell's in the audience. And so always good to see him. On slide 4, then going to change gears then and talk about actuarial funding and the CAPERS funding. Slide 5 then. Of course, as you may remember, most of the money that comes in the trust fund is from CAPERS investments, right around 50%, about a third from employer contributions, and then the balance from member contributions. And those of you that do much work in the investment world, a few days, a few weeks, a few months can make a big difference. And so, as you'll see, I'm going to talk about the actuarial valuation, which was based on calendar year 2022. The board receives it during the summer, and then I share that with you then the following session. But in calendar year 2023, we had a return of 11.1%. And so, and most of that growth came in the months of November and December. It was a remarkable turnaround, and earlier on at certain points in the calendar year, and I've got Bruce Fink here, our Chief Investment Officer, and you may remember Jared Walton, our Planning Research Officer. But I'd always go to Bruce and say, can we at least get the return early in 2023 to at least so we aren't negative? Can we at least, or maybe get to 0? Or maybe, and then later on, I got a little greedy, can we get a few points beyond that? And then, of course, here at the end of the year, we're at 11.11%, which, of course, is great news for the trust fund. And now the trust fund is over $26 billion with a B. Our third highest balance in the trust fund ever, and the other ones aren't that far ahead of it. But so $26 billion. The trust fund has more than doubled since 2000. We were at $9.8 billion. Now we're at this $26 billion. And our 25-year return, we're at 6.9%. And you may remember the target's 7%. And again, it's all very time sensitive information. Slide 6 just looks at those annual returns, and this is on a calendar year basis at 11.1%. On a calendar year basis last year, it was a negative 9.4. And so, you just think of that, negative 9.4 one calendar year, positive 11.1% the following year. And so, and you can see this goes back, it looks at a 10-year run there. Of course, that negative 9.4, 2018 is negative 2.6. And then the other years, that dashed line is that assumed rate of return, which the board has set as our investment return goal. Of course, it was 7.75, and then the board changed it here a couple of years ago now down to 7%. And so I guess this table just reminds you, I think, of the volatility of the trust fund, of investments, and the need or the importance of having a well-diversified trust fund in several different areas: investment, equities, and fixed income, alternative investments, which you'll hear more about later, and so forth. Slide 7 then just looks at the funded ratio. That's just assets to liabilities. This is kind of stepping back in time. So this is information based on that actuarial valuation. That's the most recent one, which is based on a calendar year 2022 basis. Again, we won't get to 2023 information until next summer. But even with that actuarial valuation, that funded ratio, assets to liabilities improved, went from 71.6 to 73.4%. The unfunded actuarial liability actually went down from 9.8 billion to about 9.6 billion. And so, and of course, that unfunded actuarial liability is the employer's obligation. You collectively own it, lock, stock, and barrel, for the state, school, local, for their participation. But certainly going the right way. You want your funded ratio to go up. The goal is first hurdle, get over 80% and then on to 100% funded, because of course that's where you want to end up. I just make these couple of points here that that funded ratio, assets liability, has improved by more than 17% since 2012. And that was kind of the low point. Funded ratio was 56%. A lot of concern about kind of the long-term financial viability of KPERS. And so the legislature, governors and legislatures over time has really done some heavy lifting. Of course, that's when KPERS 3 was created. And we'll talk more about that, but certainly a less expensive plan design for the employer, some additional bonds, and we'll hear also the state made the commitment to pay the actuarially required rate, and which is one of the key funding things over time, just to have the employers pay what they're supposed to. And now there's some more slides here, but I think for now, for the last 6 years, on the actuarial evaluation side, the state has paid exactly what it's supposed to for the state employees and for all local school employees. Since you may remember, state pays the entire KPERS school employer contribution as part of state aid to education. And just for that, and of course, there's lots of studies and stuff, but since the Great Recession, then KPERS were in the top 20 of about 121 statewide public plans in the country. We're in the top 20 of most improved since that 2012 period. So, and again, as you probably remember, pension funding is very directional. It's very long-term. It is like, watching a iceberg melt or something like that, although maybe it's melting quicker than it used to be, but it still takes a long time to change the ship of actuarial funding, the direction you're going, and it takes that sustained commitment of funding. I think doing the appropriate thing to make sure those public employees that retire get their hard-earned retirement that they're entitled.
Chairman, just a point of order. I'm glad to hear that the KPERS fund is the iceberg and not the Titanic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good point. On slide 8 then talks about those key fundings. Again, this is from that 2022 calendar year actuarial funding. Again, at that full rate. Great things. Talked about that negative for calendar year 22, negative 9.8. In the actuarial world, they do this actuary, and it's the appropriate thing. There's this actuarial smoothing where you take your gains and losses and you spread it over the current year and then the next 4 years. And that's so there's not gigantic up and down, particularly on the employer side, which make it very difficult for employers for their budget and to know exactly what they're supposed to pay. So there's actuarial smoothing. So because of the actuarial smoothing, from an actuarial standpoint, that rate for calendar year 22 was a positive $5.6 billion. Again, that unfunded liability went down, the funded ratio improved. And of course, part of the driver in that was there were some other previous investment gains that were smoothed in, but also the legislature, you may remember there was a payment of $1.1 billion with a B to pay down that unfunded liability, to pay down that obligation. It's a debt. It's, kind of like a mortgage. And so if you can prepay, it of course reduces the debt, but also lowers future employer contributions. And just for example, we were looking at some things like $1 billion cash infusion lowers future employer contributions about $80 million a year. So you take that, but in each succeeding year, it will save you $80 million in employer contributions to state school, which then, of course, helps from the budgetary standpoint going forward. Slide 9 then is just the active membership. You can see we're in this valuation, we're about 152,000. Largest group is at school, over 87,000, 57%. And you see local, state judges and KPNF. Our oldest active member is 91. So credit to them that the person is still active and contributing and working for a KPERS employer. So certainly a goal to set for all of you legislators. If you want to have that as a goal to try to keep working here in the legislature till you're past 91, you could be a record setter there. So there's 3 groups in Capers. Capers 1, so that's pre-2009. There's about 46,000. So of course, closed group. And this group, of course, is as those people are retirement age, that group's continuing to decline. There's about 24,000 in Capers 2, which is membership date between 2009 and 2015. And then the largest group, Capers 3, which was started in 2015. So any member that started since 2015 is a Capers 3 member. And you can just see the averages. Capers members about 10.7 years of service, has an annual salary of about 51,000. KPNF, same 10.8 years of service and a salary of about 81,000, and judges at 9.2 years of service and a salary of $123,000. On slide 10, then just looks at the retired membership based on that 2022 valuation. Again, retirees range in age from age 50 to 112. And so we were just talking to our actuary in terms of some of her other client plans that she worked with, and I was kind of proud that we had a retiree of 112. And she said, well, just the best one of her plans is the Minnesota School Retirement Plan, and they have a retiree who's 118. And so we got a little ways to go there. And then the beneficiaries range from 15 to 111. And you can see the average retirement benefit. Again, the largest group is schools, as you'd expect. But about for Capers, it's about $16,500 annually, a little less than $1,400 a month. KPNF is a little over $40,000 per year, about $3,400 per month, and judges a little over $48,000, about $4,000 a month. And of course, 88% of the retirement benefits that are paid go to our retirees. 88% of those are Kansas residents, so they, even though they're retired, it means they stay in Kansas for the retirement years. And of course, we have, people in surrounding states, Texas, Florida, well, of course, Oklahoma and Missouri and Texas, Oklahoma, Florida. We have a few overseas, but 88% of them stay here in Kansas. Slide 11 is we were just talking about life expectancy, and this is just some information as the actuary is pulling together that actuarial valuation. Of course, if a person life expectancy at retirement is higher than life expectancy at birth because the person's already made it maybe to age 65 or so, according to the Federal Center for Disease Control in Kansas, life expectancy at birth is 76.4 years of age. For Capers school member who attains age 65, that life expectancy is slightly more than 2 decades. So again, male or female would get you up to between 86 and 89, depending on that gender. Just point out there the Capers school female teacher who reaches age 65, they have an 86% probability of living to age 80 and a 52% probability of living to age 90. And again, as our actuary says, and you may remember, out of all the different kind of Capers groups and subgroups, Capers female school teachers, or mainly teachers, are perhaps the hardiest group out of all the Capers groups. And you can see it's borne out by that their life expectancy based on the actuarial tables. Employer contributions then on slide 12, and this valuation then sets it, and there's a time delay by statute. So it's the years beginning in 2025. So it's fiscal year 2026 for the state school, calendar year 2025 for local. Again, this is the 6th consecutive valuation where the employer contribution is being satisfied. And again, that's so key to long-term funding, having the employers pay exactly what they're supposed to. And you can see that chart on the right, state school, that 11.56%, local 9.6%, KPNF 24.6%, and judges 23%. And those shortfalls on the far right of that table, that's exactly what you want to see. That means, again, that they're paying, the employers are paying exactly what they have been, the local groups have been paying their actuarially required rate since 2015. Page 13 then just looks at some assumptions, and again, this is based on that 5%, the negative 9+%. Of course, if all the assumptions are made, this valuation would assume that those employer contributions would slowly increase to about 13.8%, driven, of course, by the deferred investment losses. The state school group unfunded actuarial liability will slightly increase until 2028 to get through that smoothing of the negative investment returns from last year. And then we're still on track to have the state school group, that unfunded liability, paid off by 2039. But clearly, I think these numbers from the 2022 valuation will certainly be improved once the 11% return gets factored in the 2023 valuation. Slide 14 just talks about again where we were for calendar year 2022, how the 1.1 billion helped a lot, how the funded ratio improved, of course paying what's supposed to, and the importance of the size of the trust fund, that again no retiree should have any concern about not receiving their KPERS benefit, either in retirement, either now or in the future. On the next slide, then we'll kind of switch gears to KPERS 3, if you would like, if that's good. Mr. Chairman, just keep going. Is that good? On the next slide, then, on the KPERS cash balance plan. So this is always, I think, a challenge, certainly for myself when it was created, and I think other people. You have the traditional defined benefit plan. That's KPERS 1 and KPERS 2. There's a formula. What's the person's final average salary? How many years did they work? And then what's the multiplier, which is set by statute? And so we have those three parts. You can calculate exactly what a person's retirement benefit is. And so if a KPERS member, or one member, comes up and says, "Oh, I'm going to retire in 5 years. Can you tell me my retirement benefit?" And there's a little assumption there on salary increases, but we can say yes, and this is what it's going to be, and it's going to be very, very close to that. KPERS 3 is a cash balance plan, so still technically a defined benefit plan, but it's a cash balance plan, which has some attributes of that defined benefit plan, like 1 and 2, but also like a KPERS or like a 401k, a defined contribution plan, where that risk, the investment risk really on the defined benefit plan, it's all on the employer. If we had 4 years in a row, although I wouldn't allow Bruce to do it, if we had 4 years in a row of negative returns, that would be reflected in higher employer contribution rates. Employers would have to pay it all. In the cash balance plan, there's still some guarantees, and so it's not all the way to a 401k, but on the upside, there's some of that sharing of risk. And so KPERS 3 members, over half of the active KPERS members are KPERS 3. And the next slide, slide 17, then just kind of gives you a review then of how's it like a defined contribution plan, that KPERS 3. They have an account balance. It's called a notational account. So it's kind of like a 401k account. So there's their contributions notationally go into it. There's some pay credits, not employer contributions, but pay credits that go into it, and then it gets you to this notational or kind of hypothetical account that earns interest while they're working, and so that's good. But there are on the defined benefit side, of course, the KPERS 3 benefits are paid for life. It's guaranteed 4% interest, growth 4%. So it's not totally reliant on what's going on in the market. Can't be any less than 4%. Of course, it's all part of the KPERS trust fund, so those notational accounts are all professionally managed, and then the employer contributions are, of course, determined by the valuation. There's also the opportunity for, if the market does well, there's a formula where they can share on the upside. And so they may earn some dividends, for good, strong returns that go get them above that 4%. The next slide, then, just an employee contributes 6% of pay on pre-tax, just like Capers 1 and 2. Again, it goes in, they're vested right away. And again, they get that interest credited quarterly, guaranteed annually at that 4% level. The next slide, then, on the employer contributions, then, the employer contributions contribute the same rate to fund the system. Again, for the current fiscal year, it's 12.57% for state school, a little over 9% for the calendar year. And again, the employer contributions are all the same, whether they're in 1, 2, or 3. It's the same rate. And so the employer contributions are not related to those employer credits, that notational account. And the next slide then shows you what those employer credits are that go into that notational account. And so they're applied to the members' notational account, earned quarterly. The crediting percentage, you'll see in that table there, the rates of the first 1 to 4 years of service, they get 3%, 5 to 11, 4%, and then all the way up to 6% after 24 years. So this is probably the most confusing thing about Capers 3. So there's these pay credits the employer pays, and that's what goes into their notational account. It's different than the employer contribution payments that they're paying, like the state's paying for Capers 1, 2, and 3 members. And so it divulges, there's where sort of a fork in the road there, employer contributions for funding, in these pay credits for the actual individual's retirement account. The next slide just again talks about that 4%. It's credited annually, applied to the members. They get it each quarter. It's because of the 4% compounded quarterly. There's an actuarial calculation, and so it's really technically just a little bit below 1% per quarter that's credited to their account. The next slide then talks about this potential to get something beyond 4% dividend interest credit. There again, if they get that dividend interest credit, it's applied to their account, and there's a formula, of course, statutory formula, which is 75% of the 5-year average net compound rate of return above 6%. And that's where Jared comes in, because I take his word that he calculates that all right, and that I don't have to do that. But again, they're calculated on a calendar year basis, applied on March 1st at the end of each March, and then so it's then credited the following spring. The next slide just shows you how that dividend experience has worked out since 2015 when Capers 3 started. And you can see that there were 4 years from 2015 to 2022 that there were no dividend credits paid. And the average then for the 4 years where there were dividend credits paid is about 0.9%. It's a little less than 1%. Our long-term actuarial assumption is that over time that they will get an additional 2% beyond on top of their 4%. And you can see those years in calculation in that table at the right. The next slide then finally is just the replacement ratio. And so this is just a measure of what the person's pre-retirement income is going to be compared to their retirement benefits. And so most studies suggest it's going to be between 70 to 80% of pre-retirement income is necessary to maintain the person's lifestyle in retirement. And of course, for Capers members, it's also contingent the retirement system that's based on the individuals also participating in Social Security for most our members. And there's some, of course, particularly in public safety, that may not belong to Social Security. And that Social Security payment replaces maybe 30+% of pre-retirement income. And so these graphs, it's very, example specific. So that orange bar on the far left of the table. So here's a career employee that's age 35, works 30 years. Their capers 2 benefit, had them in capers 2, would have been about 50% of their pre-retirement income. Capers 3, the blue, which is, if you just assume they got the guaranteed 4%, it'd be about 27%. Capers 3, with the, assuming that additional 2%, that dividend credit gets it up to 34%. And Capers 3, the retirement benefit is certainly very, it's based on, of course, how long the person worked, but then how long did Capers have their contributions and those employer pay credits to earn interest on, because we're taking it invested. So a person who has a very short time or comes sort of at the very, towards the end of their career, then we don't have the time, as long of a time, to invest it, earn those pay credits, or get the pay credits and get the income for them. So these are some examples. You can see, depending on those assumptions, for a career employee age 25 to 35 that just works in public service 10 years and then leaves to go do something else. In that case, again, because of that, we have the money, we invest it, we hold it till they, assuming they leave it with us. The Capers 3 variations are higher than Capers 2, but we can do lots of those kinds of scenarios, but generally, Capers 3 by plan design was intended to be less expensive for the employer to help the Capers funding position back in 2012. So it was a conscious decision, and it's working exactly as it's designed. And of course, as more people get into Capers 3, that'll save money on the employer's side as we go, march forward from that 2015 starting date. And so Capers 3 cash balance, still a defined benefit. Remember that pay credits are what goes into that notational account that the employer pays. That's different than employer contributions. It's working as designed, and maybe I'll just stop there, Mr. Chair, and take questions whenever it's appropriate.
I appreciate that, Alan. Thank you for that presentation. Committee, do we have any questions? Coach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Couple questions. You said in 2012 it changed, but then it didn't start till 2015. What went on those 3 years there?
Right. Part of it was certainly, I think it was sort of almost the generosity of the legislature at the time to give us time, because it was going to be a sea change in terms of our IT systems and staffing and education and all those things. And so allowing us, and even the employer contributions, that changed from from a pay period, or they changed from annual to pay period, sort of accounting for their employer contributions. So there was lots of lead work. And so that's why the legislature allowed us time to make that transition from 2 to 3.
And I don't know if this is a good question or not, but last year, $2 billion came into Capers. How much went out?
In fact, it was a little over $2 billion in all of the payments. So it'd be retirement benefits, disability, and death benefits. Of course, retirement benefits are by far the largest part, but a little over $2 billion went out too. So a lot of money comes in, lots of money goes out. So
thank you, Mr. Conroy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Dodson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was focusing kind of on this 70%. There's a couple of things. I mean, when you look at KP or KP or Capers, and then our KPF, and then our judges, there's quite a disparity at the 10-year point in salary. Also on this last chart, if people don't begin drawing Social Security until 62, is that reflected in those middle charts? In other words, if you leave prior to age 62, and some of these it was like a 15-year teacher, for example, at age 65, does that true back up, given whatever they've earned in their next career?
The graphic or that table only reflects the CAPER's contribution, so Social Security is not reflected in that. And you're certainly right. People can, depending on the sort of the offset, and can start gathering or receiving it at age 62. And now I think the normal unreduced Social Security is now, I think we're up to about 66 in a few months. And so, but those numbers are not, Social Security is not reflected in that. And again, as I mentioned, some of the KPNF members, for example, state troopers and KBI special agents, they don't contribute to Social Security. That decision was made decades ago that they would not contribute to Social Security. So anyway, so that's not part of their calculation. But I think it is fair as we look at those employer contributions and what the employee's contributing to remember that Social Security contribution. Because again, they're going to see that for the retirement side, contribution for members and individuals a little over 6%. So they're contributing 6% to CAPERS, 6% to Social Security. For that a little over 6%, but for that retirement. So anyway, I'm going on here a little bit, but that's Social Security is not reflected in those retirement replacement ratios.
I was just doing a little air math here, but if you look at $1,400 a month for CAPERS, and then I don't know what the average would be. Let's just say it's $2,500 for Social Security. So that's around $50,000 a year, which is 70% of something else. So that seems to be, I mean, that would be one of the things I'd be looking at if I was setting up some kind of a retirement plan. In other words, I thought 70% was going to sustain my lifestyle. That's the target I'd want to hit.
Yeah, I think between that 70 and 80%, your Social Security air math may be a little generous, but it's would be, certainly help to get them to their, their 70% or towards that, whatever it is.
Thank you. Sure.
No, Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I always appreciate it. I have several questions. The first one, we're just going to deal with this right away. How much is the cost of the ESG package that was passed? How much is coming out each year from CAPERS for the new positions and administrative costs? Can you give me a pretty firm number on what that is each year?
I think we can, and I think Jared or Bruce can talk to that. But I'll tell you, in the original fiscal note, we thought we would need a position just to do it. Eventually, we were able to find a vendor on the proxy voting side, and that's where that we thought that additional person would have to be devoted to. And we were able to hire, of course, there's a service for everything these days, but a proxy voting service that was able really to comply with the statute. So we did not have to hire an employee just to do that proxy voting tally. So we saved some money there. And I know that's what it's in the fiscal note, that's what we told the division of the budget that we would need. But as we got into it and found out sort of a developing service out there was quite a bit of interest in proxy voting really across the country. And so anyway, we were able to find a service. And of course, we're paying for it. But I think, I don't know how much. Yeah, and they can give you the details. But it turned out only to be about $53,000 is what we spent just to comply with that, with the actual monetary, budgetary requirements to comply with the law. And most of that was for hiring that service. And again, we had done some preliminary costs again. And again, as more firms got into it, the price went down considerably, even from January last year to July when we engaged them.
Okay. So that's a good thing. Okay. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Second question. I don't know if you went over this. I know you and I have talked about this over here. What is the average capers payout to a person that's, say, uh, retires after 25 years of service? Uh, what is it? And I know that that's kind of a generalization, but if I think we could I would just want to look like at a snapshot of that. Somebody that comes in and works in the state for 25 years and then retires, based on, uh, uh, say, tier one, uh, retirement. Do you have?
Yeah, well, again, I guess I'd go back at least for initially, it's about $1,400 a month for capers. And that's the average all across. And we can drill down if you want to know specifically for a person who worked 25 years. We can calculate that and provide that to
You
you.
said that's about
$1,400 a month, so about $16,500 per year.
All right, thank you. And then the last question, and I'm sure there'll be some more discussion. We've tried to get a cost of living adjustment for capers retirees, and correct me if I'm wrong, the last one was in the 1990s. Is that correct?
Well, actually, it was in 2008. But you had to have been retired 10 years to get it. So that's right. Anybody that's retired since 1998 has not received a cost of living adjustment in their benefit.
So 1998, basically everybody, and then 2008 was they had to be 10 years out from their retirement date.
There were some payments in 2007, 2008, but again, they all went back 10 years. So anyway, yeah, that's right. Anybody that's retired after 1998 has not received a cost of living adjustment.
And in the 1998 COLA, what was the percentage of the cost of living adjustment?
Oh, was that I can't remember. It was a one-time payment, I believe. Was that right? Yeah, it was a $300 payment. It was a one-time payment of $300 that was granted by the 2008 legislature with that 10-year caveat. So it wasn't built into their ongoing retirement benefit. It was a one-time payment of $300.
Yeah. All right. I think that's all I have for right now. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your answers.
Vice Chairman Clifford. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the briefing, Alan. From a governance standpoint, how are the non-school and school people elected to the board?
All active and retired members can vote, and so and they serve 4-year terms just like the other trustees. And so we, I guess, beat the drum as loud as we can. So active and retired members can either vote online. We even have a call-in thing where a person could dial in and cast their vote, or if they want a paper ballot, they can cast a paper ballot. But it's once every 4 years, and all retired and active members get to vote.
Thank you. So when I leave the legislature, I could become a candidate? Or how are the candidates arrived at?
The two elected ones, school and non-school, yeah, I think I don't think there's any prohibition against active. I mean, anybody meets the requirement of active or retired could run to be a trustee.
Thanks, Chairman. The statutory ratio or the combined statutory rate, is there technically like a 6% match going on there to the employee contribution plus the 5.56 to get to the actual rate? Is that what's going on there actually?
Well, actually, I think it's more that the employer contribution, that 12.5% that I mentioned, The actuary calculates that every year, which is reflected in the valuation, and that's that plug factor. Again, what is needed to satisfy the actuarial requirements to keep Capers on the right funding track to get that unfunded actuarial liability by 2039 in the state school rate. So I'm not sure it's really I mean, it's been more, certainly it's been more than the 6% that the employee is contributing, but I think it's really a standalone calculation. So it doesn't first start with the employee's contributing 6, so we'll start with that employer 6 and go on there. I think it's a totally separate calculation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any further questions? Do we have any questions on Zoom or WebEx? I'm sorry. If you do, go ahead and unmute yourself. Seeing none. And I do want to recognize that Representative Mon is also on WebEx. I did skip over him earlier. Alan, I have a few questions, different kind of areas and topics. I'm going to go back to slide 24, the replacement ratios. And then 23, the dividend experience. Is there any way we can get the numbers? We're batting about 500 on this, about a 1%, I think we said.
Mhm.
Is there any way we can get the income replacement ratio numbers with the guaranteed interest plus the 1% dividend? So I guess up to 5% total instead of 6. I'd be interested to see what that does to the Capers 3, the green bars. And then slide 20, the employer credits. Is there any way we could get numbers of what the replacement ratios would look like if we left 1 to 4 years alone, 5 to 11 years alone, but 12 to 23 years we bump up from 5 to 6%, and then 24 plus years we bump up from 6 to 7%.
Yes, that's certainly available. We'll just have to get with our actuary, but yes, certainly.
And yeah, if Jared or whoever could help out. I just, as we we've had discussions on Capers 3 and kind of the areas where we're lagging and what kind of fixes we could put in. I'm kind of curious to know what that would do to those career employees, those 35 to 65, 30 years. This seems that Capers 3 is lagging a little bit in that field. And just curious what that would do to that. My second line of questioning is China. Obviously, we've had discussions about foreign adversaries. And the question earlier about HB 2100, the ESG bill. Can you kind of talk about, and if this may be a question for Bruce, how much we're in China right now, what our investments look like, how many companies, what did passing 2100 do to divest from a number of Chinese companies? So if you could touch on that.
Sure, I will, and I'll let Bruce respond too. I'll just say right now we have exposure to China. We have about $210 million, give or take a little bit, which is about less than 1% of the portfolio, about I think 0.85% of the portfolio is in China. And of course, things are never quite as, in the investment world, there's mainland China, which is considered a developing country. And then you have Hong Kong, which is considered a developed country. And so, and of course, that's from the days, I think, of course, when Hong Kong operated under British rule and all that history there. But so about $210 million, we're down considerably. I mean, the board this last session, and Bruce can talk to it, but before, and in terms of our international equity managers, China was in their benchmark. So, of course, and they need to, we measure our success with them. How are they doing against the benchmark? So we took China, the board took China out of that benchmark. And some of the international equity managers said, and we're out. And so just within the last year or so, and Bruce, I think our exposure to China is down about 2/3 because of the actions that the board took, in part in getting back to the benchmark. So, and the number of companies has greatly reduced, just a handful, but if you'd like, Bruce can tell you the details.
Bruce, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Alan. Yes, as Alan laid out, in November, the board adopted a new index for the International Equity Program that the new index to which we benchmark our managers' performance no longer included mainland China or China exposure, retained exposure to Hong Kong with that benchmark change. We looked about a year ago, as Alan indicated, at the end of calendar year 23, we had about a $210 million in China and Hong Kong. Of that, about $12.3 million was in China, the balance being in Hong Kong. The China piece represents about 5 basis points of the total fund as of the end of the year. At the end of January 2023, which just as the beginning of 2023, before the changes, China represented about 0.6%, or so we've reduced our China exposure about 90% through this benchmark change. Changes to our Hong Kong exposure, our exposure to Hong Kong is down about 50% to about 75 basis points, 0.75. So that's where we're at currently, approximately $210.5 million in China and Hong Kong. Of that, $12 million is in China. That represents 2 companies of China exposure, according to our method of identifying those companies.
And how much, I guess, on the private equity side are we?
Private equity is very small. The last estimate, which was in the middle of last year, was about 16 basis points. So roughly, it was $39 million early last year at the end of 2022. I don't have an up-to-date number, but it would not have changed much from that exposure.
And then on the Russia side, I think we're about 44 million in. Their markets are closed, obviously. Is there any silver lining? Nothing on that?
Nothing new to report on that front.
I appreciate that. Are there any questions on this kind of line of topic, Coach? Okay, yeah, just this topic right now. Are there any questions on the China or foreign adversary topic? Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up on the 39 million in private equity. That's total private equity or China private equity?
That's private equity. It's China private equity, or China exposure within our private equity program.
If you could go into just a small detail on what exactly private equity is.
Sure, certainly. So private equity is they are investments that are made in non-publicly traded companies. So it could be anything from a venture capital, very seed capital, very early investments in new and growing companies. Typically, our private equity program focuses more in the buyout space, which are a bit more mature companies that have established businesses, established markets, that are looking to grow their businesses, all within a private structure. So private versus public. The ownership on of a private equity of a private firm is not traded on any public exchange, generally financed through a limited partnership arrangement, and the partners provide capital for the underlying company to either grow, expand, acquire other companies, and to continue to build that business in a private setting. Ultimately, that private equity would be perhaps sold to a financial buyer or strategic buyer, or go public.
So getting out of these LP contracts, let's say, it's not as easy as just selling public equities. Could you kind of go into detail about how we would have to unwind private equity and perhaps some of the cost that it would take?
Yes. I'm not going to have the cost number because we'd have to reestimate or recalculate that cost. But if there was a prohibition against China exposure in our current portfolio, it would lead us to have to look for an exit from those limited partnerships. And because these are private market companies, and the limited partnerships themselves, the entity through which we invest, are not publicly traded up, we would have to find a buyer on the secondary market. And I know we did this calculation last year for a couple of different looks on this. but there is a significant, it's called a haircut. If we own $100 of private equity, what we would likely realize in a secondary sale would be substantially lower than that. Currently, we have about 11% of the portfolio in our private equity program. Doing some math in my head, that's roughly $2.6, $2.8 billion. So you can see how those, if we had to sell those allocations, how those at a discount, how that would start ending up. I don't have an estimate, but we can certainly.
I want to say last year when we were discussing this, it was roughly about $100 million.
It was a significant number, yes, sir.
Vice Chair Clifford.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out for the committee members that in the eye care space, practices are being bought up. So in Wichita, the Green Vision Group is now owned by private equity. In Kansas City, former Senator Jim Denning's practice, Discover Vision, is owned by private equity. And in medical practices, generally the rollover is about 5 to 7 years. So early on, as you suggest, it's very illiquid, and you may end up with a haircut, or maybe the stockholders might buy it back from you, but again, at a discount. But the thought is to have another entity with money to come along and roll it for a profit.
Absolutely. That's exactly correct. Yes. Thank you.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you indicated that the investments that we now have in China are down significantly in the last couple of years. My question is that just by Caper's choice, or was that required by something that the legislature did?
Yeah, I think it's driven by two factors. One, first of all, I don't believe it's not really a function of any legislative action on the ESG side. What has driven this change in 2023 are both the benchmark change that the board adopted in November, again, removing the incentive for investing in China from the benchmark that we've assigned to our managers. So you can kind of think about it as if you're being evaluated against this set of this index that includes China, and that country is removed, and you're being evaluated against this new index, it's going to influence your behavior. I think we've seen that happen to a large extent. Another factor contributing to this is China is done relatively poorly, compared to the U.S. and other countries over this time. So you're seeing some natural valuation changes, just prices dropping on what we have left in the portfolio or what remains in the portfolio. So it's a combination of those two effects.
Thank you.
And Bruce, could you give us a quick rundown on the economic outlook of China right now? I know it's slowing down a bit. Do you see that as a concern for ongoing investments in China?
I think it's created a concern in markets for many market participants. China's growth, and I'm not a China expert. Again, I can speak very, very generally to what we see and what our managers are telling us about what's happening in China. But slowing growth, demographic trends are negative. I think the Chinese government is trying to provide, what do I want to say? Not financial support, but provide sufficient liquidity in order to try to help these companies. So there's a lot of factors that are influencing China's relative performance currently.
I appreciate that. Committee, are there any further questions for Bruce or Alan or Jared over there is missing out on all the fun? Coach?
Mr. Chair, if I could talk to Alan, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Maybe Mr. Conroy, maybe a vague question, but we're 73.4 funded ratio. Is that pretty strong, or is that kind of in the middle? Or
I think generally it's kind of in the middle of the pack, maybe just slightly below that. But if you divided statewide wide public pension plans. There's these 121 of them. We'd probably be in the middle third of that group, and certainly, again, as you heard, certainly better than we were. But we're, kind of good old Kansas. We're kind of in the middle of the pack.
I know you want to be 100%, but would 80 be a really strong?
Yes, I mean, that would be a great goal, and we've sort of beat that sort of muffled drum a bit. We want to get over 80% because, again, the higher that number is, when the next big downturn in the market comes, and it's it's going to come someday, then the stronger that funded ratio, then the trust fund can weather another .com bust or bubble bust or whatever, the 2004, 2005, the 2008, 2009. We can weather those in a better position if we are.
Several people have asked me, hey, you got $4 billion set aside and haven't been used yet. We gave the Capers 1.1 billion. You said we got a return of 100 million. Would that be another good investment that would get 7% every year? Would you get that 100 million every year?
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly would be glad to receive anything the legislature would want to send. And certainly in terms of my career at Capers, that day we got a wire transfer for $1 billion was certainly a good day, good way to start off the day. So it reduces the debt. Again, you own the debt, lock, stock, and barrel. So it reduces, and it's a one-time expenditure. So it's not ongoing, not built in the operating budget, every year. And then, as I mentioned, then future employer contributions will be on $1 billion, would be $80 million a year less by paying down that unfunded liability. So it reduces debt and saves you future employer contributions of $1 billion would save you at roughly 80 million a year.
Thank you, Mr. Conroy.
All right, committee, we're going to go ahead and wrap up questions now. Thank you, Bruce, for all that, and Jared and Alan. You guys' team is awesome, and we're very, very happy about the return last year. When I got that email a couple of weeks ago from Alan, he was very excited. All right, committee. So we're going to go ahead and open the hearing on HB 2103. We're going to go to the reviser, David, for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2103. This, as the chair indicated earlier, there was a hearing on this bill last year. This bill was actually introduced in the 2023 session, and this would remove from statute the Keepers Public Employees Retirement Fund Statute 744921, the statutory limitation of 15% on alternative investments that can be invested by the system. This would now remove that cap of 15%, and then would require the board of trustees to adopt a limitation expressed as a percentage. It would remove from statute and sort of delegate to the board then to set a percentage cap on the amount of alternative investments. As I said before, this was introduced in 2023. You might notice it was the 2022 supplemental version of 7421, but as has been stated, we had House Bill 2100 that actually amended the statute, on another piece on the ESG side of things. So if this committee decided to go forward, there would need to be a technical amendment to then make sure we're making these alternative investment amendments to the current version of the statute, the 2023 version, or any other committee amendments that the committee would adopt. Just so that would be a technical sort of fix, but I'd be happy to stay in for any questions.
Committee, any questions for David? Seeing none. Thank you so much, David. Actually, I have a request. You can go ahead and take your seat. I just have a request. Could you find me when this initial cap was put in place and if it's been changed in its history? I'm just curious on that. All right, committee. Up first, we have Alan Conroy. Back up. Alan, welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is sort of a rare occasion. Capers Board really leaves legislation, benefit changes, all those. It's up to your discretion. You're the ultimate plan sponsors, but this is one time where the board, this is really a request to the board. And so I'm, I guess, in the unusual position, I'm testifying as a proponent for a bill. I think that, as you'll hear, I think in terms of helping the trust fund reach that 7% assumed rate of return, we can certainly, this legislation would help us achieve that. And I'll just kind of highlight, I think on my I don't know if we have testimony or not, but as Bruce mentioned, private equity, there's the these alternative caps, there's private equity, again, things that are not, companies that are not, on the public exchange, so you just can't go out and see the value of them. And then there's infrastructure by our definition. So those are investments that the trust fund makes in physical assets, so it'd be such as roads, bridges, power generation, or telecommunications. And as of the end of the calendar year 2023, the alternative investment portfolio reached about 13.8%. We're currently at 12.99%. And I think you can see, I guess they've got, it's there. There's a pie chart there on your information that you can see between domestic equity, international equity, fixed income, and so forth, and private equity, and then part of the real return asset class is a key part of, again, having a well diversified portfolio. And maybe to respond to your question, or David's probably got it, and we even did a little.
My answers are in your testimony. So, David,
we even did a little one-page table, but the original alternative cap was first defined by statute in 1992. Was placed at 10% of the total investments, and so that cap was revised in 1993 down to 5%. 92, 93 is, I kind of try to block it out, but it's kind of the dark days of the investment difficulties. Lots of legislative concern, special committees, subpoenas, special prosecutors. I mean, lots of stuff going on. And there was a lot of legislation really to sort of safeguard the trust fund through the years. And so part of that change then, that cap was revised to 5% by the 1993 legislature. And so we were working on that. By the end of calendar year 2000, we were getting close to that 5% cap. And so, of course, then getting close, then the dot-com bubble went, and then, of course, things went the other way because all the public equity went down so much, private equity, the value of that, and so went up. And so we exceeded that 5% statutory cap back in the early 2000s. And so the statute still provides, if you go over the cap, you don't have to like start selling things right away. You just can't do any more. So even if the value goes up, gets you over the cap, that's okay, but you can't continue to invest in alternative investments. And as Bruce kind of alluded to, private equity people, there's this whole, it's a whole kind of different world, and you have to get in queues, and you have to get on the, you search out quality private equity fund managers. And sometimes, I mean, they can be oversubscribed because they're good performers. And so more people may want to, if they're going to issue, say they're going to do some raising thing of $1 billion, they may have people that'll say, hey, their list of people that want to get in may be more than that. And so having that relationship established, being a quality, I guess, investor with them certainly is important. And so you don't want to get in the cap of position where a cap comes into play and now you have to tell them, oh, sorry, we can't invest, which, they'll say, okay, but then that probably puts us back at the end of that investment queue because they'll find other people that invest. So anyway, so that's just some changes. So the board went to the legislature, requested that 5% total cap be changed to a 1% cap of annual commitments to alternative investments. Legislature, the 2004 legislature approved that change. And so then we started the process of working with those equity managers, getting in their investment queues and seeing what could be done. So that all was going on. Then in 2012, the system requested a change in the statutory language that would allow net new investments, the alternative investment portfolio, up to 5% of the total market value of the system. And so the 2012 legislature passed a bill to enact that change. And then they also then in that year added the current overall cap of 15% of the total alternative investments as a percentage of the investment caps. And so we're not there yet, but we're kind of within shouting distance. Can see that cap again. That could impact our ability to invest in these private equity opportunities. And so that's kind of gets us to this request of the board. Two things. One, there's lots of current statutory requirements in terms of alternative investments, again, from those dark days of the early 1990s. And so if we want to invest in a private equity commitment, we've got to have a favorable recommendation from a qualified independent expert in investment management. So they've got to present a report to the board. Of course, the staff has to do the due diligence and, of course, recommend it to the board. Has to be consistent with the board policies. We have to, have systems to monitor and accurately measure the investment performance. And again, the annual net commitments to alternative investments cannot exceed 5% of the total investments. There has to be two other qualified institutional investors, which is a big thing, I think an important point. So it's not like, and that was maybe one of the difficulties of the early 1990s, it was just capers. Capers was the investment working with these alternative investments. And one of the stories, if I may digress just for a second. So the 1990s happened, a new executive director. First weekend after he was hired and on the job, he gets a call from a fund manager from Kansas City that there's been a bad storm. There's major leaks in this warehouse in Kansas City. And the executive director at the time said, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but why do I need to know that? And he said, well, Capers, you own this warehouse. And we were the only owner of that warehouse. And so we did not want to, that was one of the changes. So there has to be not only two other investors, they have to be qualified institutional investors. So large investors like Capers that also are going in on that alternative investments. Our share of it can't be more than 20%. Any single investment can't be more than 2.5% of the total alternative investments of the trust funds. And then the total alternative investments in one individual multi-investor pool cannot exceed more than 20% of the total of the system's alternative investments. So I think, so that'd be one thing. Lots of other statutory provisions still in place. And then the second thing would be just in terms of there will still be a cap, but it will be set by the board as part of their annual asset allocation. As they look to private equity, fixed income, alternative investments, the board would set the cap. It's not like there would be no cap. It would be set by the board. And so anyway, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll just stop there. Again, to remind you, it's a request to the board, request your favorable condition, still be a cap placed by the board, and there's still that long list, that litany of things that are still statutory requirements on the Capers Trust Fund for alternative investments. And we'll share this separate handout with you just on the alternative history cap.
I appreciate that, Alan. Thank you. Just want to clarify one more time on what alternative assets are, because I've gotten a lot of questions thinking that Capers and investing in crypto or Bitcoin or Doge or whatever the hot cryptocurrency is out there. This is not that. This has nothing to do with crypto. We're not investing in crypto. Just want to clarify that when we talk alternative investments.
You're absolutely correct. The trust fund owns nothing in crypto, and nor would we ever want to have anything in crypto, at least certainly at this point.
Committee, are there any questions for Alan? Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be interested in knowing historically, and by that I mean 10, 20, even 30 or 40 years back, what the average return is on your alternative investments versus your public traded equities.
Yes, I'm sure we can do that. I'm not whether Bruce has it handy, but yes, we can do that. Do we need to get back to him, Bruce, or can you? Is it now okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So the time over the past 10 years, this is as of December 31, 2023. So the annualized returns for the alternative investment program was 15.5% annualized. Over the last 20, 14.4. And since 1995, about 12.6.
Thank you.
Thank you for having that information, Andy, Bruce. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, any of our WebEx participants, do you have any questions? If you do, just unmute yourself. Hearing none. Okay, we'll go ahead and, oh, yeah. Alan.
I was just I forgot to mention, and Jared put this handy dandy graph together in terms of other public pension plans and if they have a cap that we were able to find. And of course, kind of like maybe if some of your kids, they're doing it or they're not doing it, but you can see of the cap, the Capers Trust Fund is way over on the right in terms of the low cap and alternative investments, and all these other ones that we were able to determine have a much higher cap.
So we're just, with this chart, we're just looking at caps because it has us at 14%. I thought our cap was at 50.
Well, yeah, that's right. I think it was the value. Yeah, it's our target.
Oh, target.
Our
Okay.
investment target, but it's not the statutory cap of 15%. Sorry, yeah.
Committee, any further questions for Alan? Seeing none, thank you, Alan. That's all we have for proponents. Does anybody want to speak as a proponent to HB 2103? Seeing none, we'll move to neutral. Would anybody like to speak neutral on HB 2103? Seeing none, we'll move to opponents. Is there anybody here to speak as an opponent to HB 2103? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on HB 2103. Committee, like I said, it's my intention to work this Wednesday. If you do have any amendments, bring them Wednesday. I know we do have one amendment, as the reviser stated earlier, so we'll have that one as well. And without anything else for the good of the committee, we are adjourned.